Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Hyman. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting and scaling companies so that you can do the same. Whether you're venture capital backed, private equity backed, I don't care what backers you've got to master the people part of the business. And so I'm always looking for experts on this topic. Many of the times my guests are CEOs, business leaders, but today's a little bit different. Today I found an expert who has invested months, years studying some of the top performers in the tech industry. He has studied Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. His name is Alex Kantrowitz, and Alex recently published a phenomenal book, a fascinating book called Always Day One. Now, if you know Amazon, you know what I mean by day one. And he's been writing about this stuff for years. He wrote for Ad Age, for Forbes, for BuzzFeed, and now recently launched his own venture, Big Technology. He talks in the book about the need to reinvent over and over and over, acting like a startup. Easy when you're a startup, not so easy when you're Amazon or Facebook. He did 130 interviews to write this book, I think including Mark Zuckerberg. We're going to talk about that. And with all that, welcome to the show, Alex. How are you?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Yeah. It's great to have you. Thank you for making the time. So what inspired you to write the book? You've been writing for 10 years and then you said, oh, I think I'll write a book. What was it?
Yeah, so as a tech reporter here in Silicon Valley, and you're right, I'd been doing it for years, we kept writing about what the tech giants were doing. You know, they did this and they did that. And we never really spent a lot of time working on stories about how they did it. And so I thought that like the entire world hears about the symptoms all the time, but they don't know much about the physiology. And I thought that what's going on inside the tech giants is really going to be applicable to anybody's work because they've created some new systems that have allowed them to operate so effectively. And eventually, I think the successful companies in the world that compete with them are going to implement those systems. So I thought this is something that's not going to lend itself to an article. It needs to be book length. It needs to have months of research put into it, so I'm able to really explain it in a coherent way. And figured, might as well give it a shot and try to make it happen. And we just released in April, and I'm pretty excited about the response so far.
The inner workings of the most powerful companies in the world. I love it. Again, the book is Always Day One. One of the things I found fascinating that I want to start with is, as I went through it, it seemed like you had identified a different kind of culture for each of these businesses. I think you said Amazon has this culture of innovation. Facebook has a culture of feedback. Google has a culture of collaboration. Tell us a little about how that happened or how you think that happened. These are just big tech companies. They're all in Silicon Valley. It would seem like they'd all have the same culture, but they went in radically different directions, right? In terms of what they emphasize. What was your key takeaway on how and why that happened?
So these are all different approaches to the same problem, which is that these are huge companies and they have to figure out a way to stay on their feet and stay nimble. Otherwise, they'll fall apart. In the 1920s, I think the average company on the Fortune 500 would last 67 years. Today, it's 15 years. Yeah. So it used to be that you could take one idea and subsist your entire lifetime on it. Yeah. Now you might need 3 or 4 big ideas. And so the tech giants have all tried to figure out ways to which they could break down the barriers that would prevent ideas from flowing inside their companies and make sure that they're able to get as quickly as possible to decision makers. And it's kind of like, evolution, like some frogs will show up with spots and some will show up with stripes and different colors. But they're all just trying to survive in the, natural selection world. And that's what I think's happened with the tech giants, that you have Amazon. They have this culture of what I call democratic invention, where they give everybody in the company the opportunity to write down ideas for new inventions and bring them to leadership.
So the best idea wins regardless of where it comes from. It doesn't have to be from Jeff Bezos. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Actually, you would be surprised at how few ideas actually come from Bezos himself and how many come from the rank and file. Facebook is similar. Instead of making people write things down like Amazon, some people might know, makes people write stuff down in a 6-page document. And that's how ideas travel within the company. Facebook, you basically just go up to leadership and you tell them. I can't tell you how many stories I heard of people going right up to Zuckerberg and being like, we should create this product, or even, hey, you know what, you're wrong about this. We're going about this entirely the wrong way.
Yeah.
And even in some cases, Facebook needs to change the entire way it operates, or we're going to go down the drain. And he's listened and changed. Yeah. And that's how Facebook's living in the most fickle industry of all time. the social media world, where
Incredibly
like one
difficult.
day you're on the news feed, the next day you're in TikTok, and you don't
Yeah.
even remember what Facebook was. And
Yeah.
that's why we have so many dead social networks. I mean, you think about MySpace, which is the classic example, but even something like an HQ trivia, which you thought was going to take over the world, where everybody logged on at the same time, played this trivia game. That's, you know, ancient history at this point. Yet
Yeah.
Facebook manages to stay relevant, and I think it's really due to this feedback culture. And then you look at Google; it's another way of them trying to break down these barriers. Where Google actually, people like think that Google just cracked the search code and sort of figured out its way to the top, and that's all it's done. But really, Google's had to reinvent itself over and over and over again. You used to get Google on a website. Then most people actually got Google on a browser extension called
Yeah.
the Google Toolbar that's
Yeah.
out on Internet Explorer, and then
I remember
Chrome,
those
and then
days.
Android. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone used that toolbar.
Then they went
More
to
than
mobile.
60%. Then we went to
Yeah.
mobile.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
once we got onto mobile, people started talking to computers,
Yeah.
right? So then all of a sudden,
Voice.
Google
Right.
said, I'm going to lose my search share, not to Apple, but maybe to Amazon with the
Right.
Echo. And so then
Right.
they had to reinvent into the assistant. And in order to have a culture that's filled with people who are willing to reinvent all the time, you know, reorganize the products and put them back together in a way that's coherent, you need a culture of collaboration. And that's the way they've done it. So different paths to the same goal, but all like very interesting ways to get there.
It's funny that we wouldn't normally think about Amazon and Facebook and Google and Apple and Microsoft worrying, right? We kind of say they're on the top of the world. They have nothing to worry about. We're all worried about how do I attack them or how do I get a piece of the market. What you're saying is fascinating, which is they do worry and they should worry because they can lose it really, really fast. And those few companies have persisted for a reason. I'm interested in Apple. So over the past few years, at least since Steve Jobs' passing, a lot of people, myself included, feel like there hasn't been a ton of huge new innovations, right? The iPhone is probably the most recent. Um, what is going on? And do you think the end of the road comes for them because they are this culture of refinement as opposed to this culture of radical invention?
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be the end of the road for Apple, but I think Apple's really headed towards that place that Microsoft was under Steve Ballmer, which is a once proud technology company that becomes the butt of jokes. And I know it's controversial to say, but look, your company can operate in two different modes. One is you can be in a method of building for the future state at all times. And the other is you can be a company that milks your assets. Let's just go quickly into the Microsoft example. Microsoft
Yeah,
was an asset milker.
yeah,
It said, we've built Windows. We're going to be on the desktop for a long time. Let's get all the money we can out of Windows. And they missed mobile, and Balmer laughed at the iPhone, and we know what happened after that.
yep, yep, yep.
And only after they said, let's build for the future state and started investing in cloud, did Microsoft become relevant again. So then you ask yourself, where is Apple on that spectrum? Is Apple a future stater or is Apple a asset milker?
Kind of
And I
a
would
is
say you
it's kind of
have to.
leading edge or leading edge. Like where on that spectrum
Exactly.
do you want to be?
Yeah, and Apple is definitely like an asset milker. It has the iPhone. The iPhone is sort of, you can look at the iPhone for Apple today as you could look at Windows for Microsoft back in the day. Apple is insistent on getting as much money as they can out of that thing. And they actually have called acts of elimination, not invention, courageous. Like
Hmm.
when they took out the headphone jack, Tim Cook stood in front of everyone and said, you know what this took? Courage. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it took courage because you're trying to milk your asset. Now you've created a new product, AirPods, and that's the way you're going to get more money out of your flagship asset.
right,
But I don't think that was
right.
an inherently inventive thing. And if you start to look inside the culture inside Apple, it's really not geared. So we talked a little bit about how Facebook, Google, and Amazon are always breaking barriers down so ideas can travel, employee ideas can get to decision makers can bring them to life. Inside Apple, it's the exact opposite. There are barriers everywhere you look, and employees always complain about how they're being underutilized and their ideas aren't appreciated. And there's
Right.
concrete examples. You look at Siri, you look at Apple's attempt to build a self-driving car, and these are concrete examples of where these barriers have prevented Apple from building for the future because the culture is backwards. And I think you and I agree, right? It starts with culture. It starts with
Sure,
leadership.
sure.
Once you put that into place, you can get in position to win. And Apple's is backwards right now.
So based on looking at these businesses, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, what what have you been able to discern about the types of people that they hire that work there? I don't mean the top leadership. I don't mean Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, but the rank and file, to use your term. Is there a different flavor or type of person that they hire and look for? Or are they kind of all the same, look competing for the same talent? It's just that because of the culture of the place and the leadership, it drives them to behave differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, first, let's be honest. They're looking for highly specialized talent, people with advanced educations,
Sure.
who spend a lot of money on those educations. And it sort of goes to like one of the problems in our society today, which is that like some of the best opportunities are only available to a small percent of people.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we'll tell everybody else they're living in a meritocracy, but those opportunities are never available to them.
Yep.
But like if you think about the mentality, let's go one step deeper. If you think about the mentality, you don't have people inside these companies who get set in their thinking. They're always open to change. They're not people who want to memorize and spit back or walk into work and check boxes and then go home. They're open to change. They're open to
They're not
abstract thinking.
maintainers.
They're not maintainers, no. And they think, okay, well, if we did something one day, how can we do it differently the next? And in fact, many Amazon employees looked me straight in the eyes and said, our job is to work ourselves out of a job. I want to invent and then simplify the process, which is part of Amazon's leadership principles. And if I can do that well, I'm doing what I'm here for. And then the idea is I'm going to get a chance to invent again. So a lot of people in jobs will sort of protect their territory and do what they can to make themselves stay relevant. And that's understandable. I get it. But it's definitely not what happens by and large in the tech giants. Are there territorial, fiefdom protectors in all of these companies? Absolutely. But is that the type of person they hire? No.
And is that because it's the DNA of those people? In other words, in the interviewing and vetting and assessing of candidates, they weed out those people who are the the turf defenders, or is it because they hire people and then those people quickly realize that behavior is not tolerated at this company, and therefore I better be looking for how to reinvent things?
So there's certainly a behavioral aspect that these companies interview for. Amazon famously will do its interviews based off of the leadership principles. So just to give everybody at home an idea of what these principles are, they're like 14 statements of what Amazon is all about.
Yep.
And unlike most mission and visions, like, written inside the company, maybe put on an HR website, you might read them once in the application process on your first day and never think about them again. Like I can't remember a single mission and vision of any company I've ever worked at. But Amazon, these people, they for in some way, Bezos has gotten them to live by these principles to the point where they start to talk about the principles while they're, I've been there at brunch with Amazon employees. You're talking about, oh, did you pass the salt? Like, oh, that was bias to action. What should we order? Okay, I don't really like that dish, but I'm going to disagree and commit. This is how like interactions for Amazon employees go.
Words.
No question. And Amazon employees that are married to other Amazon employees will like evaluate their marriage by these principles, and many will teach them to their kids. Yeah. So I think part of this is behavioral. Amazon interviews asks you in the interview one, have you showed bias for action? But I have to say, this is not like a special sauce. Oftentimes it just involves a company giving people permission to act this way. Most people go into a company in the first 6 months, they're so creative and filled with ideas and just pouring out energy of new products and business lines and processes that the company can get into to help make them better. And so this is sort of, I think, the natural state of human beings in the work world. But after about 6 months, you get told enough times by your boss, hey, can you just actually do that assignment? Or we really don't need you to do that. We really need you to do this. And you sort of get the point. Oh, I'm in this company to do this one thing and help maintain. Like you talked a little bit about maintainers.
Yeah.
People teach their employees, I'm a maintainer. Whereas in the tech giants, they get taught, except if you're an Apple, right? But they get taught, you're a reinventor. Yeah. And that's a totally different way of doing business.
But Apple really is a bit different. Apple really does kind of stand out from the rest of the group, right?
Totally. I think Apple stands out. I mean, it's funny, like you think about job satisfaction, right? I've had many conversations with employees inside the tech giants. Okay, like people inside Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, they're not like happy all the time, but they're happy, right? I can't tell you, like, I'm trying to think of maybe have I found maybe one or two examples of Apple employees I've spoken with who are actually satisfied with their experience there. Yeah, really? Because if you think about that Maslow pyramid of needs, where like self-actualization is at the top, people will get that at Facebook, Google, and Amazon and Microsoft. They do believe they're part of the inventive process, but very few people are part of the inventive process at Apple. And it doesn't matter that they're working in some UFO with like, floor to ceiling glass that, is breaking world records and, filled with natural light. It's just not going to do it for people if they're not
So
going to
why
be part of the inventive process.
did you get a sense of why they stay? Why do these unhappy people stay at Apple? Do they
Yeah,
pay out the ass or?
I think money helps. I think there's a prestige element. And remember, like even us as consumers, we have this attachment to Apple. So people that apply to that company just think it's like, it's like going to the major leagues if you're a sports fan. It's like, oh yeah, I'm at Apple now. And it's tough to disabuse yourself of that dream, which has been
Yeah.
built in consumers' minds for years by the Apple marketing machine. And I think it extends to their employees as well.
Fascinating. I'm interested in the mechanics of writing a book like this. You interviewed, I think, 130 people.
Mm-hmm.
Was this sanctioned by these companies, not sanctioned? Was it inside scoop? Was it down a dark alley late at night where you had to disguise your face and use a fake name? Or like, how do you do this?
Yeah. So this book is, okay, it's an interesting, great question. It's an interesting process. So there's a couple sides to it. First of all, this book did get participation from Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. I think this is the first time in history those four companies have participated in a book
Nicely
together.
done. It says
Thank
something
you.
about you. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We'll see if they'll work on another one with me. But yeah, by participate, I mean, I got to sit down with Zuckerberg and
Yeah.
Jeff Wilke, who's Bezos' number two, and a whole
Sure.
smattering of Google executives. But like for me, like I'm not an access reporter. Like I want to get the full story. And
Sure.
so even sitting in the publisher's office for that first meeting, I was just like, look, like I'm not going to be here just to get the company's official line and write it down and pass it along to readers. My job is to tell the complete story. And so that means for every single one of these companies, I spent more time on the phone with ex-employees or employees who were unsanctioned to talk than I did with
Right.
people, who
Got
the
it.
company presented through the front door. And I think that combination is really nice. Like I'll tell you one story. When I sat down with Mark Zuckerberg, it was great because that was like one of the last interviews of the book. So I'm glad I got that interview through the comms team. But I was also able to say, hey, Mark, I've spoken with some people outside the company. Here's what they had to say about you. What do you think about that? And then to hear him react to that was actually very cool and made its way into the Facebook chapter.
Did he feel like he is understood as a leader or kind of misunderstood? The media loves making him out to be evil. It's hard for me to believe he's as evil as they make out. What was his reaction to how he's perceived?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about his perception, but like I do think that he is misperceived, at least in terms of the way that he runs the company internally. And I think that if people go through the Facebook chapter, they'll really understand and see a different side of the guy than they get every day. Now, has he made some bad decisions? Absolutely. But, one thing I would say about like reading news stories is, there's going to be, there are going to be times where like there's going to be zero consequence to criticize someone. So right now, if you were to say anything critical,
to throw stones. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were to say anything critical of Mark Zuckerberg, you'd get like a lot of nods.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see a lot of criticism of him, or one of the reasons, right? Like the guy's definitely he's not batting 1,000, Jeff. Like there's some problems, in that guy's company.
There's some big problems.
Yeah, but generally when you see all the criticism and you never see anything positive, it means we're missing something.
Yeah.
And so like, look, this is sort of the idea of the book. Are these tech giants perfect? No, they're super flawed. But what do they do well? The internal processes that they're using are actually pretty effective in helping them stay ahead from a business standpoint. And so I said to myself, well, look, we have these two options. One is we can lambast the tech giants and not look at these processes and just let them stay ahead. Or I can go out, write the book, present it to business leaders and say, hey, why don't you think about co-opting these processes?
Absolutely.
Right? Put my neck out a little bit, say, look, I'm going to write some things, people might say this is a little too positive, but again, I'm writing about process and I'm okay with that.
And you can't argue that they've been successful. It's inarguable.
Absolutely.
You can argue with a lot of things, privacy and
a lot
we
touch on that in the book, right, for sure. Right. But the bottom line is like, if I take these things and present them to people and companies are able to act more effectively and invent more with thoughtfulness, right? Learn from some of the mistakes, which I detail, then the book, is going to do what I hoped it was going to do.
Well, I think it's going to do it. And Alex, I give you a ton of credit for writing Always Day One. Our listeners have to pick up a copy because if you're going to scale a business, I don't even care if it's not a tech business, you'd be foolish to not try to understand what arguably the most successful companies in the world in our lifetimes of any time, right? Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, what they're doing, what they're not doing, how they hire, how they build their culture. Alex Kantrowitz has spilled it all out for you. You'd be crazy not to pick it up. Alex, how can people get their hands on this wonderful piece and get in touch?
Thank you, Jeff. So yeah, you can the book is available at all major booksellers, online, and whatever offline ones are open right now.
I don't think there's any left offline, are there?
Yeah, it hasn't been a great time to release the book. So, but it's good that the internet still works. So yeah, I feel like if you type in Always Day One to Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, whatever your search engine preference of choice is, you'll be able to get there. It'll be on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, all that stuff. And then can I also talk about the newsletter?
Please do.
Yeah, so I left BuzzFeed a couple of months ago. I was a senior reporter there, and I'm starting my own publication, and it's already off the ground as of a few weeks ago. It's called Big Technology. You can find it at bigtechnology.substack.com. It's a weekly newsletter about the tech giants. If you read it and reply in the email, I will write back. And then we are starting a big technology podcast. It's just Big Technology Podcast in any podcast app that you use. And I'm super excited about the guests we have coming on for our debut. They're going to be people who haven't spoken to the public for a while, and it'll be saucy. And
what's great is you've got access. You've got access, man, and that's what makes this stuff interesting. I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.